Hey, everybody, welcome back. Welcome if you're joining us for the first time. Welcome back if you're returning. And if you're joining us on replays, thank you so much for popping in. As you're joining us, we'd love to know where you're joining us from and what's one way that we can help you in between our impossible lives. So let us know who you are, where you're from, and a way that we can help you in the chat. And your comments are welcome. And I'm delighted today to introduce you to our amazing returning guest. And I really have to thank you, Luiza, because Impossible Live would not have started without you. So let's start from there. I was approved for LinkedIn Lives a bit ago and not really sure where to start. And then, fortunately, came the amazing Luiza. As we're talking, I realized that I really wanted her to be my first guest. So then I'm like, okay, how are we going to figure this out? And I appreciate Britton Tillman for introducing us in her social sales link group coaching. So thank you, LinkedIn Whisperer, for connecting us. But Luiza, I would love, before we really get started on today's topic, love to give you a chance just to reintroduce yourself to our guests, to those who haven't met you from our two previous lives, and just let them know about wonderful you. So please let us know about you.
Well, thank you so much, Mel. I really appreciate your invitation and I love having these conversations with you. Who I am? Uh, I am the president of and CEO of Mastering Cultural Differences. By now, you probably I'm sure you have detected my accent. This accent comes to you via Brazil, where I was born and raised. But I came here to study, then life happened and I started working, and I've had incredible professional experiences. I feel so privileged. I've had opportunities. I've worked in Ukraine, in Tokyo, in Puerto Rico, in Spain. So that's why I think of myself as Brazilian by birth, but multicultural by choice. And why I am so passionate about teaching people about differences and how to work effectively across differences.
That is amazing. And Luiza, I have no idea really. I appreciate you for helping to remind us as everybody talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and as some pay less attention to it and others pay more attention. But it really helped me in our conversations, besides just talking about inclusion. I've really been talking a lot with people lately about comfort zones, starting to realize in the process of working with larger clients and clients
Mhm.
across different uh, cultural zones and different time zones, that our comfort zones are kind of underneath and surrounding a lot of what we do, whether we're comfortable personally, whether we're comfortable professionally. So I'd love to ask you two questions about that. One would be, are comfort zones cultural as well as professional?
When I think of comfort zone, the, the definition is um, a place where you can come in or feel more at ease. I actually like to think of more of stretchy zones, because especially because our organizations are becoming increasingly more diverse, and so we need places where we can come in and understand each other, and that is going to happen once we get outside our comfort zone. Yes, it will be uncomfortable, yes, it will be challenging, but it's going to be spaces for you to really expand your worldview. So that's why I like to think not in terms of comfort zone, because comfort zones, what happens? You step out of the comfort zone, your instinct is immediately to step back in. So I like stretchy zones better because that allows us to expand, our worldview. But in reference to you question about our comfort zones, cultural as well as professional, I don't think we can separate one from the other. And
Mm,
whenever I walk into a space, I carry all my identities, and my culture, is part of it. So I always push the notion that I need to show up not as my cultural self, but as my cultural competent self. By that I mean, we understand there are differences. We need to recognize what those differences are. And then I need to have the skills to adjust my behavior to the orientation of others. So, yes, let's show up, as our culturally competent selves.
I love that. I think the challenge sometimes, as we would say, and I'll say this from exploring, where I was as the differences of exploring where I was as the daughter of a scholar, so as a teacher's kid,
Mhm.
and being in settings with a lot of adults where I was not welcome to express my opinions as a child. The reminder,
Mhm.
I had my activity bag and I needed to stay into it and,
Mhm.
pay attention to what was in there as a child in, a lot of adults settings. But
Mhm.
I think I love what you're saying about cultural competence because I never ever thought of it that way. We don't necessarily think of ourselves sometimes in certain situations as fully competent to express our
Mhm.
identity. And I guess that was where I was as an employee. I was rarely in work situations where it was possible to bring all of those identities. What
Absolutely.
would you
In a lot of times we don't recognize it. For example, I just thought of a situation when I was teaching. I was working with my advisee, and she was very uncomfortable in approaching her professor, and she needed to do that to discuss about her grade. And the common answer would be go see your professor, go talk to your professor. We tell our students this all the time, but I had to recognize her hesitance as not as her being shy or whatever, what have you. It was actually a cultural difference. There is a cultural difference that she was an international student, so a cultural difference explained that. So my culturally competent self had to recognize that as a cultural difference, not a deficiency on her part. So I helped her see that, and I gave her the skills to to have the courage to go talk to her professor. So, and that shifted the situation, but I had to see that for what it was, and then allow her to, help her adjust her behavior so she could be successful here. Her cultural orientation would not, she had to change that so she could be successful in this environment. So going back to the stretchy zone, I had to stretch, her comfort zone so that she could operate, from a different perspective as well.
that was really really cool, especially as you're saying that you're really able to help her expand what you called our stretchy zones. I think of comfort zones sometimes as there's a boundary line
Mm-hmm.
between our comfort zones. On the other side can be kind of depending on how we approach it, can be a panic or a stress
Mm-hmm.
zone.
Yeah.
And in rare instances we can find a safety zone,
Mm-hmm.
or that we can help others, build them. I remember one of the talented bosses. I was in the garment industry, and very talented boss. She really built a culture where we all could communicate, no matter who we are, no matter what our role was, no matter
Hmm.
what our cultural background was. I loved it because one
Wow.
day, without a suggestion box, someone suggested that we, kind of have lunch where we all brought in lunch dishes. And it was something that had never been done before. And we didn't even have like a lunchroom.
Hmm.
So what was really cool was we ended up almost with mini workstations with places to like snack and munch. And I remember thinking, one of our colleagues said, I knew something told me as I was leaving the house, don't bring full size plates. Bring little plates like it's a cocktail party.
Huh.
So then she was adorable, running around from area to area, putting these teeny little plates so people could just stop. And we smiled, and she told us a story of how in her culture there was kind of like the equivalent of an open house day, where you went around to neighbors, and that's what you did. She says, and she laughed, she says, from those days, she says, my mom always brought extra plates, and they
Oh.
weren't paper plates, so her mom would have each kid, schlepping a bag, and then she said they'd spend the week trying to get their dishes back from the neighbors. But I laughed because I think in the process of it, of being inclusive, of trying to help each other professionally, I think for me, I always felt there was a really strong invisible line. There was
Mhm.
the Mel who could show up professionally, and there was the Mel who showed up personally. And back in those days, those two trains weren't supposed to meet. No one cared, I felt, until I was in the right environment. And I'll say I'm more conscious of it now as an entrepreneur than I ever was, to be able to express that. But how do comfort zones then, since they're a stretchy zone, as you're saying,
Hmm.
do you think they apply to our work or do they not?
Well, I think absolutely, because like I said, I don't think we can, separate one from the other. As I walk into work, I'm fortunate enough that I am in a place where I can bring my authentic self in. Bringing my culture with me is part of who I am. I don't think I can separate that. We just have to, you know make sure that we make room for others, that we recognize differences, that we recognize different perspectives. It's not only my way. There are different ways. I live in a world where there are multiple right answers, and the right answer at the time will depend on who's in the room at the time. And these are conversations that I have with my CEOs all the time. We can't just see one perspective. And this is a lesson that I actually learned many years ago when I was fortunate enough to be accepted into a program at the East West Center in Hawaii. And I went through a lot of trainings from an individual called Gregory Trifanovich. He actually designed a lot of the training for the Peace Corps. And he taught me that, learning a different perspective, learning a different culture, learning someone else's point of view, it's like opening up a whole new window. We look at the world through our window, but when we learn a different perspective, a different point of view, a different culture, it's like opening up a whole different window. And we now have different ways of looking at situations.
I absolutely love that because you as always are helping me answer several questions at the same time. I think the thing is, I always thought in the beginning, and I appreciate a recent conversation in Thought Leadership Branding Club with Angie Alexander. and Lynn Williams and Bobby Umar, and I'm really, really grateful for having had this conversation with them last week. And in some cases, the comfort zones seem to be a place where we kind of feel a little bit of control of the environment, or they can be a place where we really think we kind of have psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
We think we're safe there.
Mm-hmm.
And Lynn was asking a question, as you were just saying, about helping a student communicate with her instructor. How do we take things from inside our comfort zones and find a comfortable way to share them with someone outside of that zone, like in work, to kind of create almost a safety zone, especially in
Mm-hmm.
environments where it's not always safe to, don't always perceive yourself as safe to communicate, or there could be some
Mm-hmm.
microaggressions going on, or some sort of workplace triggers. How do you help
Well,
with the
well,
perspectives in that situation?
yes, I think that's a lot has a lot to do with the way I work with organizations. In fact, you just mentioned microaggressions as part of my Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leadership Academy. The academy has three levers. One is about it's culture. How do you create a culture of understanding of others? And then there's the climate, and then there's change. How do you implement all the changes that have to happen? But in the climate lever, so to speak, we talk a lot about microaggressions. How do you move from being a bystander to an ally? How do you understand cultural differences? How do you have different difficult conversations around race, around whatever issue it is? How do you respond in an effective manner? In fact, I developed this is one of my most requested workshops. Was how do you answer when someone calls you a racist or homophobe or sexist? Let's say, for example, I work in a bank and you come in to apply for a loan, and the loan has to be denied, and then you tell me you're being a racist. So immediately my response would be to defend myself. I'm not being a racist. There are rules, regulations, what have you. But the moment I enter into the space where I have to defend myself, that is a debate mode. I'm right and you're wrong, and I need to show you how you are wrong. I think what we need is opportunities for individuals to get out of the debate mode and get into more productive dialogues, because in a
Mhm.
dialogue, you know it's working with the individual to find a common understanding,
Mhm.
because I know what it is to be me. I don't know what it is to be you. I don't know your history. I don't know what life has thrown at you. So we need to find those spaces so that we can understand each other. Oh, here's an idea. We don't need stretchy zones. We need dialogue zones.
Oh, I love that. Oh, I love
You
that.
heard it here first, folks. We need dialogue zones, and actually, that's one entire module in my workshop. Is how do you have these conversations? I actually taught a course at Iowa State, and I don't know of any other institution that has that course. It's called Dialogues on Diversity, and we would just sit down and have conversations. Um, around social justice and in many other issues, because the reality is we walk around in a silo. I know what it is to be a woman, a mother, a Latina, someone who speaks with an accent. I don't know what it is to walk in an environment as a Black woman. I don't know what it is to how it is to depend on a wheelchair for my mobility. I don't know what it is to be stared at just because of my hijab. I don't know that. So we need to get out of our silos and and start, you know, understanding each other, finding common ground, finding a common understanding.
I absolutely love that. And I truly, really, I love your dialogue zones. We are definitely,
I know we should coin that, shouldn't
we're
we?
going to coin that as a Louisa, because I think that is the part, as Catherine's saying, we have opportunities to stay in our comfort zone as well as to expand outside of it. And I love what you're saying culturally and professionally about maybe too that there are mentors who can help us move through it.
Hmm.
If we don't necessarily find the person at work or in our workplace to help us move through it, if it's not a human resource issue, if we don't have
Hmm.
strong relationships with our colleagues, or if we're the new employee who's still going through our onboarding process. I think what I'd love to ask you also, Louisa, as we're talking about these, is what is something you've done recently outside of your comfort zone?
Outside my comfort zone, I would say I have started. I'm a very private person, and whenever I show up, I show, the academic in me shows up. Um, and that has it has a long history behind it. And that's something that is very important as part of my identity. I have a PhD, and to me that was, and I'm saying that is because it is truly a miracle that I have a PhD, because my mom, all she finished was third grade. My father only finished fourth grade.
Mhm.
So for me to move beyond that, I had to seek a lot of help. I remember one day coming home crying because I wasn't doing well in college. And my mom opened the door and she couldn't say anything. She didn't say anything. She knew I was struggling and she couldn't because the woman had third grade. So, and later in my research on I received a grant and I did a research on factors leading to the academic success of students of color at predominantly white institutions. One of the factors was, if not number one, ask for help. You need to ask for help and you need to recognize when you need help and go ahead and ask help. So, going back to your question, what I did in a recent podcast that I did, I instead of the academic in me, I had the opportunity to allow the real Luiza, come out. It was the Heart, Hustle and Humor podcast led by, hosted by Dr. Theresa Ashby, and it got a little crazy. We laughed so hard. We laughed so hard because I allowed all these stories, all these instances in my life that in to come out, as part of the humor segment. I seem to think that humor is essential in our life. I think that. Uh, and I tell my children I am hilarious, but they don't believe me that. I tell them all the time. So, and one of the that led to a conversation where humor does not translate from one culture to another. And I don't know if we have time. How much time do we have left? Oh, we have time. So remember a time when I was with some friends when we were driving through Iowa, a beautiful part of Iowa, and my friends were talking about, growing up on a farm and dressing chickens. And I'm sitting on the back and thinking, well, maybe they were poor, there was no money, to buy toys or something. And at some point, in the conversation, I just say, I ask them, how do you get the chickens, to stand still? And they're like, what? Yes, you run after, you grab the chicken. How do you get them to stand still so you can dress them up? Put bonnets and little apron on everything. And because that was my dressing chickens idea. And they laughed so hard. I know, my friend who was driving had pull over, and we just ended up laughing so hard that we all cried, because that's an instance where humor, you know does not necessarily translate. And I tell my audiences when I'm working, doing intercultural communication workshops, and I caution them, never, phrases and jargons and humor and sarcasm does not apply, because if you come from a different culture, you will likely interpret that. You will take the literal interpretation of what dressing a chicken is, which is in my mind, it's like the storybooks. You put a little bonnet and apron, and as opposed to what really dressing chickens mean. So humor does not translate from one culture to another. That was, the lesson I was trying to impart in that segment.
See, I really loved your podcast because it is a Louisa energy that, boy, it is a reminder to really fully let ourselves out and play. And you will laugh because yesterday we were at our first engagement party, and mm, toasting Lexi and Josh, my our nephew and my godson and his beautiful fiance, and their engagement party was at a farm, and it was a working farm. And after listening to your amazing podcast, and I've listened to it twice now because Louisa's stories were delicious. There's a chicken greeting us when we finally get to the farm. And as I'm laughing, as we're leaving hours later, there are two chickens. And one is approaching from one side of the road, and one is approaching from the other side of the road. So, Louisa, I apologize for missing the picture. That really would have gone really well with your wonderful story. It reminds me too, and I really appreciate what you were saying about humor. We're not really sure that what's funny to us is what's funny to someone else. What
Mm-hmm.
when someone doesn't necessarily get the joke.
Yeah.
Um, and I appreciate that from a good friend who reminded me that they speak four languages, so they're quadringle. So it depends on what language you said the joke in, and
Yeah.
if they're then translating the joke into another language. So I love it because two friends who are quadrilingual reminded me sometimes their responses are delayed because I had to take it
Yes.
and translate it into another language for me.
Yeah, there's this great book that I have. My brother sent it to me. It's a literal translation of all Brazilian sayings. It's a literal translation into English. So you find things like, the cow went to the swamp, which doesn't mean anything here. The saying in Portuguese is, a vaca foi pro brejo, means we say that when, the situation is hopeless. We don't know what else to do. But if you translate that literally into English, that's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense, and that's why I love that book, that movie. And I actually have the book Lost in Translation, because you find signs all over the world. Yes, the words are in English, but they don't mean what they're supposed to mean.
I love you reminded me also of something in the process of working with clients and really trying to help myself also in the process of trying to build relationships. We have things that are happening internally that we rarely communicate to others
Mhm.
outside of our comfort zones. We
Mm-hmm.
rarely communicate them. And one of the filters, and I appreciated it in having the conversation with Angie and Lynn and Bobby in Thought Leadership Branding Club, was the reminder that internally there are some things that we measure or that we're looking for, and we don't necessarily share them. I,
Mm-hmm.
I, I call them returns. There are things I call them, one of them is ROO and ROE. Catherine, thank you so much. You're the best. Is ROO is returns on opportunities and objectives.
Hmm.
That's something internally that we may be looking for returns on, and we don't necessarily communicate it with others, with our colleagues, with our supervisors. Rarely, maybe occasionally, if you're in a culture with feed forward, maybe you communicate it with a team sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe with someone in human resources.
Mm-hmm.
But these are things that happen internally, and we don't necessarily translate them, much less share them with others outwardly. And the other one is ROE, which is the returns on energies and engagement. I found with working with clients and working with myself, my comfort zones and trying to uh, maintain the boundaries of them. Like, I love what you were saying before about showing up as your full self. For some of us who didn't always feel as comfortable doing that in certain business relationships or professional relationships, we have a little bit of a wall where the boundaries are. And
Mm-hmm.
we started experimenting and encouraging clients to experiment with this with their teams, to share some of the returns, some of the things maybe that we're looking for that are internal, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe not to necessarily share them all on one day as if it's a buffet or a smorgasbord on what we're
Mm-hmm.
looking for, but to slowly maybe share some of the things that we're interested in a way that maybe will help build a safety zone outside of our comfort
Mm-hmm.
zone. Because for some who don't hire talented professionals like Louisa, and I was really appreciative of it. A wonderful woman that I met locally who's rather influential, who will never understand what it. Seeing her, I met her over a table. And as you would say, it was one of those tables that wasn't filled with diversity. And it was a table at which we were the two women who looked like each other. What I
Mm-hmm.
loved was she made no secret about her ability to be able to run the table. It was a reminder, as you're sitting in places where you have a chance to maybe experiment and build some leadership skills or build some communication skills, or it's your first time around a mixed table and you're not sure who you're sitting around at the table with.
Mm-hmm.
She went out of her way to make sure that I was really comfortable. I was the secretary at the table, so to speak, or one of them. So I'm sitting there with my pen and my paper, and she really could see that I kind of was into my own head. And she
Wow.
went out of her way, communication style, leadership style, to keep asking me what I thought, until I
Mm-hmm.
finally put down the pen and paper. And it was the reminder, this was a discovery session.
Hmm.
And if we didn't always participate, if we didn't always share what we were looking for, then there would be no discovery. In these sessions that were basically financed, by a grant, they wouldn't be as productive. What I loved was she reached out to me as looking at today's topic, and she's like, I need you to know I'm watching you. I need you to know I'm seeing you. It's such a really helpful reminder, because years ago, she showed me how to communicate differently
Mm-hmm.
in my own style in a place where I wasn't quite comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciate that. I'm sorry, Louisa.
No, no, in hearing you share this story, it reminded me of, you know, we what it is to be the only, especially those of us in the minority, in the numerical minority, what it is to be the only woman in leadership, on the board, the only black in the department, the only transgender in the company, the only woman wearing a hijab, the only single parent. Or so we don't know that, and that is, those of us in that situation, we we need support, we need encouragement, because it's a very lonely and hard place to be, if you are the only of whatever it is. So we need to see that, and that's what inclusive leaders do. And doesn't have to be in a company, in any setting, any situation, on the table, seeing that, recognizing, and allowing, creating the space for you to come in and be yourself.
I'm going to remember to send her a thank you note to thank her for creating, as you called it, a dialogue zone.
Yes,
Because unless someone opens up the door or extends a hand or lets us know that it's a welcome place, we don't necessarily step over that
hmm
boundary. In the conversations also, and with Angie and Lynn Williams and Bobby Umar, Lynn Williams was asking about resilience, and I love this because it reminds me of a post that Aries had recently about how you show up authentically. And she had a post about a woman in business and something different happened than what was expected after what should have been a normal company event. Something unusual happened, and it caused her to have to change how she handled it.
hmm
And it caused her to have a conversation with her boss about it. And her boss asked the question. And when she explained to her boss everything that had happened, her boss then thanked her for her courage, because sometimes these are things we don't normally share them.
Mm-mm.
They can be really uncomfortable. Um, and we don't necessarily share them in a way to help someone either learn ways to make sure it doesn't happen again to someone else,
hmm hmm
or to help others who might encounter the same unusual experience.
hmm
Hopefully it helps that organization as they're building best practices. Hopefully it helps them as, sharing and training new employees who might be put in the same
hmm
situation that she once was. But I think in the process, it reminded me sometimes internally in your comfort zone, there can be tenacity. And if you are able, or if we're able to let that out past the boundary, sometimes is what shows up as resilience. I didn't have a personal
hmm
definition of resilience, but when Lynn asked this question last week, it reminded me sometimes inside of our comfort zones, we have internal strengths.
hmm
We don't necessarily share them with others.
No, and I see when you talk about tenacity, I think in terms of hustling, and which is, you do what it takes. You have the clarity of where you want to be, of what you want to do, and then you just start working to make sure it happens. And that's what we all have to do.
I love that because I think you're reminding me that might be one of my answers to that question I asked you about what's something you've done recently outside of your comfort zones.
hmm
And I I think that reminder occasionally to explore. I'm not saying every single day try something that puts you in a panic or a stress zone.
hmm
I'm not saying step out in a work zone, but occasionally I was laughing because the thing I'd say I do that helped me step out of my comfort zone is I'm becoming more the raise your hand woman again. I stopped for a while. I stopped because I found myself uh, accepting volunteer opportunities that weren't necessarily the best fit.
Mm-hmm.
In the process of showing up to like help or serve, I also learned needed to spend some more time supporting family and supporting
Mm-hmm.
family members. I think so. I'd have to say for me that something outside of the comfort zones is really becoming probably more selective about when I raised my hand,
Mm-hmm.
to understand that in the looking at the returns on objectives and opportunities, or uh, trying to safeguard my energy or plug some of the energy leaks and help clients do the same, that occasionally that means being able to take a step back,
Mm-hmm.
to look at what Louise was mentioning before, the reminder, what are the other perspectives in the room?
Yeah, when you were talking about, just now, I was thinking of something, a lot of the times, the internal dialogues that we have in our home, our own heads, we can be our worst enemies. We stop, we prevent opportunities, we prevent growth because of those pesky dialogue stories that we tell ourselves. We just need to find the courage to kick them out to the curb, and so that we can show up more authentically, and start having conversations, and having the courage and the power to share ourselves, but also to learn about others, to so that we can create a common understanding. Because you need to learn my perspective, and I need to learn your perspective. That's what a dialogue is, and that's what creates, stretchy zones, because now we will both get out of the situation with added understanding, with growth, and with learning.
I absolutely love that. I am going to write dialogue zones in some new gorgeous teal color with some stars on the outside, and kind of make it really my lesson for today. It's just like your post recently, and I absolutely loved your post. Louisa had a post, with diversity and humor. I had never seen it before, and I needed to see it. It was one of those weeks where I appreciate it. It reminds me of a conversation I had with Catherine coming back from vacation. The reminder to lighten up and loosen up, and that we need to. It's the only way too
Mm-hmm.
that will actually create those dialogue zones or explore those stretchy zones. There are days we don't feel like it,
Mm-mm.
and we all go through that. Where I used to call it being stuck in my comfort zone in a lovely, comfortable chair. And,
Yeah.
it was a really safe place, and it was just good to stay there. But talking to Catherine, just even about just the loosening up a little bit, the lightening up, if we don't lighten up, it's a lot to carry.
Because the alternative is, life is throwing stuff at us all the time, all the time. You either, curl up into a fetal position and start bawling, or you look at it. And I think that's what humor does for me. Is it gives a different perspective. I need a different way to look at situations, and that's what carries us through.
And I love that too, because I think that also you reminds me, like I was talking about the tenacity,
Hmm.
that ability to laugh, whether we're doing it privately or we're doing it publicly, or we find a shared space where we're able to explore, as Louisa is encouraging us to explore, the hashtag diversity and humor. Hey, Andrea, how are you? Thanks for popping in. And, it's an opportunity, as we say, to maybe welcome others in. So I thought in the beginning of comfort zones, as friends and some coaches had taught me, that was my very public private space. And I can say very public because the public was in small lowercase, and the private was in uppercase.
Hmm.
So the reminder, as Louisa's saying, make it a stretchy zone, Make it a dialogue zone. If you're looking for ways to discover Louisa's gems, check out the link to her that Heart, Hustle, and Humor podcast. I'm going to listen again because I want to think about those chickens from yesterday and remember them as a treasure of a wonderful family celebration and our first, engagement party. But really, just as you need some help exploring comfort zones, exploring dialogue zones, definitely consider reaching out to amazing Louisa, who has you have a course coming up, right?
Yes, I'll be doing a master class focusing on cultural differences you need to know so that you can avoid misunderstandings in the workplace. The dates are November 7th, 9th, and 10th. The registration is not open yet. It's going to be soon, but you can DM me, find me on LinkedIn or find me, go to my website and message me. But that's something that I feel it's very important. We need to understand cultural differences so that we can avoid costly misunderstandings at work.
And thank you so much, Catherine, for putting the dates in the chat. We're really
Yes,
looking forward to
thank
popping in
you.
and to inviting others in. Will your master class be the same on the 3 dates, or is
Yes,
it
yes.
okay?
So it's
Okay.
just going to be repeated on different days.
Fantastic, fantastic. Give us an opportunity to invite others in to join them. And really, Louisa, thank you so much for returning. And I thank you because you helped me build my stretchy zone around LinkedIn Lives and on Possible Lives. And I can't thank you enough for joining us back today to
Well,
help us explore our comfort zones. And to those of you joining us live or on replays, thank you so much. Thanks for your keen insights. Please keep them coming. I don't think we've toasted to you today. So this is to you as you're celebrating, whether it's something special in the fall or in life. And I really want to just thank you for joining us and hope you stay safe, stay well, stay inspired, and stay in touch.
I will.
And for those who I'm mentioning this to, I just found out Thought Leadership Branding Club, there'll be a chance for me to invite guests in next month. So let's stay in touch and it'll be follow hashtag uh, TLB Club if you're following the hashtag or the Thought Leadership Branding Club page. But thank you for joining us. And I hope you stay safe, stay well, stay inspired, stay in touch, and have a magnificent day. Take care. Thank you,
Bye, all.
Louisa. Bye bye.